It is 1990, and Ronald Reagan's presidential memoir has just arrived in bookstores. An American Life runs 726 pages, carrying the reader from his early years through Hollywood, the Screen Actors Guild, the California governorship, and 8 years in the White House, all of it narrated in the warm, wandering voice of a man who loved telling stories about himself. Buried somewhere inside that mountain of paper is a marriage 9 years long, with 3 children and one of the most photographed households in 1940s Hollywood. It receives a single short paragraph. Reagan writes that the marriage didn't work out. He notes that it produced 2 wonderful children, and then he moves on, almost mid-breath, to the woman he married in 1952, closing with a line he would repeat for the rest of his life. Sometimes, I think my life really began when I met Nancy. Consider what that sentence actually does. If his life began in 1952, then everything before it, the wedding chapel, the Oscar-winning wife, the daughter who lived one day, belongs to somebody else's biography. Politicians trim their histories all the time, and memoirs are advertising with page numbers. But this particular omission trailed a 9-year shadow and an Academy Award, and it left behind a living witness in California who could have contradicted every word and never did. And on the other side of that paragraph stood a woman running the same operation in reverse, because from the moment Reagan entered politics in 1966 until his funeral in 2004, Jane Wyman enforced a rule with journalists that bordered on doctrine. One question about him, and the interview ends on the spot. 2 of the most famous faces of their generation shared 9 years of marriage, then spent nearly 4 decades refusing, in eerie coordination, to describe it. So what exactly were they both declining to talk about? Did a future president quietly sand an inconvenient chapter out of the American record, or did something stranger happen here, something that required 2 signatures instead of 1? To answer that, rewind to a Warner Brothers lot in 1938, where an earnest contract actor from the Midwest met an actress already missing one husband from her official biography. The year is 1938, and Warner Brothers is shooting a military academy comedy called Brother Rat. The comedy matters less than the casting. Among the cast, Ronald Reagan, a sincere young Midwesterner working his way up the studio ladder, and Jane Wyman, born Sarah Jane Mayfield, a quick-witted actress stuck in light supporting parts. One complication: Wyman, at the time, remained married to her second husband, a New Orleans dress manufacturer named Myron Futterman, or at least the studio called him her second husband. For decades, standard studio biographies listed Futterman as husband number 1, until census records and legal research surfaced an earlier union, a brief 1933 marriage to a man named Ernest Eugene Wyman, whose surname she kept for the rest of her professional life. Which means that before Ronald Reagan ever spoke a word to her, Jane Wyman watched a husband quietly vanish from her paperwork. She understood, better than almost anyone Reagan would ever meet, how a biography gets rewritten. Hold on to that thought, because this story ends with a president doing the same thing to her. Her divorce from Futterman became final in 1938, and the courtship with Reagan accelerated on the set of the sequel, Brother Rat and a Baby, in 1939. It moved rapidly, even by studio standards. Studio colleagues remembered Reagan as genuinely smitten, an unpretentious young man captivated by Wyman's energy and wit, and by late 1939, the 2 announced their engagement. They married on January 26, 1940, at the Weekirk of the Heather Chapel at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Read that location again, because Forest Lawn is a cemetery. Hollywood's next ideal couple exchanged vows within walking distance of the headstones, because in Los Angeles, even the memorial parks ran wedding venues, and nobody in 1940 chose to treat it as an omen. The ceremony stayed modest by industry standards, but the reception told you everything about the ecosystem this marriage would live inside. The Beverly Hills home of Luella Parsons, the gossip columnist who championed the couple in print at every opportunity. Their loudest press advocate doubled as their wedding host. The marriage arrived half-born inside the publicity machine, and the machine wasted no time putting it to work. Almost immediately, the Warner Brothers publicity department began aggressively marketing Reagan and Wyman as Hollywood's ideal American young couple, a pairing sold to the public as wholesome, unpretentious, and traditionally patriotic. The pitch stuck. Fan magazines like Photoplay and Modern Screen ran irregular photo spreads from the couple's custom-built home in the Hollywood Hills, praising their budgeting and their domestic harmony. Sit with that for a second. national magazines published admiring coverage of two movie stars keeping a household budget. Frugality as a celebrity brand. It worked, partly because it matched what American audiences wanted their stars to be, and partly because both halves of this couple photographed, like an advertisement, for the institution of marriage itself. The image also functioned, in the coldest business sense, as an asset. Warner Brothers held pieces of both careers, and a beloved off-screen couple sold tickets and studio goodwill all at once, so the couple maintained the marriage in public the way a studio maintains a franchise, with regular content and no unflattering angles. Neither Reagan nor Wyman invented the arrangement, but both lived inside it, and years later both would learn how strange it feels to have a marriage archived in glossy print. On the wedding day, Reagan ranked as the bigger star, and the entire arrangement rested on that fact. His profile climbed with Newt Rockne, All-American, in 1940, and Kings Row in 1942, while Wyman remained parked in chorus numbers and supporting roles, exactly the billing the publicity department preferred. The formula wrote itself: rising leading man at the office, charming actress wife at home. In January 1941, a daughter named Maureen arrived, and the fan magazine version of the Reagans gained its final ingredient. Just one problem. The formula came with a shelf life, and a world war stood ready to flip it upside down. When the United States entered the war, Reagan put on a uniform. Not the kind the newsreel celebrated. He served in the U.S. Army Air Force's 1st Motion Picture Unit in Culver City, a military posting measured in sound stages rather than beachheads, a short drive from his own front door. Genuine work, genuine uniform. But the assignment froze his acting career in place at precisely the moment the war remade everyone else's. When he returned to civilian work, he found himself typecast, struggling to land the top-tier dramatic roles that seemed within easy reach after Kings Row, and a decade of carefully built momentum drained away somewhere. Specifically, it drained across the breakfast table. While her husband's career idled, Jane Wyman transformed. The light comic player climbed into serious drama with The Lost Weekend in 1945, then earned her first Academy Award nomination for The Yearling in 1946, and critics who barely registered her a few years earlier now discussed her as a dramatic actress of the first order. The household grew during those same years. In March 1945, the couple adopted an infant son, Michael, and the magazines kept printing the ideal family spreads on schedule. Think about what that reversal does inside a marriage built, publicly and privately, on one specific hierarchy. In 1940, his name sat above the title, while hers sat among the supporting players. By 1946, awards voters knew her name and casting directors hesitated on his. That reversal needs no argument to sting. The sting arrives on its own every morning with the trade papers. Underneath the spreads, the center of gravity shifted. She climbed while he idled, the leading man whose stardom stalled inside a uniform on a Culver City soundstage, and by war's end, the professional standing of husband and wife stood fully inverted from the day they married. None of this needed to end a marriage. Hollywood has absorbed stranger imbalances. But in 1947, two events arrived in the Reagan household within months of each other. One private and unbearable, the other public and all-consuming. And together, they broke it. On June 26, 1947, in the middle of everything else this story has described, Jane Wyman gave birth prematurely to a daughter the couple named Christine, and the child died the following day, June 27th. One day of life. Contemporary newspapers and fan magazines, so eager to document this family's budget and its breakfast nook, barely connected the tragedy to the state of the marriage, and their readers never learned how deep the damage ran. The ideal couple story kept no page for a dead infant. Biographers eventually found what the magazine skipped. Edmund Morris in Dutch and Ann Edwards in early Reagan both identify the loss of Christine as the devastating emotional fracture of this marriage, the point where a widening distance between husband and wife hardened into a break neither of them could repair. Wyman sank into deep grief and depression. Her husband, through those same months, kept drifting somewhere else, not toward another woman, but toward something that proved, in its own way, far harder to compete against. In 1947, Ronald Reagan won election as president of the Screen Actors Guild, and the job swallowed him whole. Forget sleepy meetings about contract language. Hollywood in 1947 resembled a battlefield of jurisdictional labor strikes and anti-communist warfare, and Reagan stood near the center of it, giving his evenings and weekends to strike fights, ideological combat, and testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee as the industry's communist panic turned federal. Jurisdictional strikes alone could swallow a calendar. Brawls over which union controlled which jobs, waged through pickets and negotiations that blurred labor politics into loyalty politics. The Guild presidency handed Reagan an audience and a fight that never ran out of rounds. To Reagan, the Guild fight outranked everything else in his week. To his wife, grieving a daughter while carrying an ascending career of her own, it looked like a husband who converted their home into a debating society. Whatever the committee rooms decided, the arguments came home with him every night. He found a stage that never closed, and he never stopped performing on it. A modern comparison helps here. Imagine a household where one partner is grieving a lost child, while the other spends every free evening in what amounts to a permanent unpaid committee meeting about office politics, then comes home eager to recap the debate, strip out any trace of comedy, and the Reagan home of late 1947 appears. Months after Christine's death, the couple separated, and Wyman would eventually compress the entire collapse into a single sentence, delivered under oath in a Los Angeles courtroom. In June 1948, Jane Wyman walked into Los Angeles Superior Court and filed for divorce from Ronald Reagan, citing extreme mental cruelty. The phrase sounds damning, a trick, partly, of the era's legal machinery. Under California's pre-no-fault divorce laws, a marriage could not simply end. The law demanded a guilty party, and extreme mental cruelty functioned as the conventional statutory ground, the standard formula attorneys reached for when a marriage died of causes no statute recognized. Less an accusation, in practice, than a password. California also refused to let a divorce finish quickly. An interlocutory decree came first, opening a legally mandated interval, and only once that interval ran out did the marriage formally end, which is why the paperwork on this divorce carries 2 dates a full year apart. Her testimony, though, turned specific. Under oath, Wyman told the court, "Finally, there was nothing in common between us. I think I am a fairly sensitive person, and I couldn't take his endless political arguments." Not infidelity, not cruelty in any physical sense, just political arguments. According to the sworn record, the first marriage of a future president dissolved because the husband would not stop talking about politics, and the court agreed enough to grant an interlocutory decree on June 28, 1948, with the divorce becoming final on July 18, 1949. Wyman received custody of Maureen and Michael, and the court ordered Reagan to pay $500 a month in child support. So why did it really collapse? More than 70 years of biography and gossip have produced 4 competing explanations, and the 4 are nowhere near equally good. First, the explanation Wyman gave the court: the Guild. Her testimony finds corroboration in Reagan's most thorough biographers, Lou Cannon in Reagan and Gary Wills in Reagan's America, and among historians, the explanation carries the status of established fact. Reagan's immersion in union meetings and anti-communist politics alienated a wife who wanted a home organized around family and work rather than labor disputes. Second, career divergence, and here the timeline matters more than the legend. The tidy version of this story claims Wyman won her Oscar and promptly outgrew her fading husband. The dates say otherwise. She filed for divorce in June 1948, months before Johnny Belinda, the film that remade her career, even reached theaters that September, and her Academy Award for Best Actress arrived in March 1949, after the interlocutory decree, but before the final one, which produces one of the strangest details in this whole story. Jane Wyman accepted her Oscar while still legally married to Ronald Reagan. Tension between a rising actress and a stalled actor existed, and biographers from Ann Edwards to Edmund Morris document it, but the marriage sat in court before her triumph, not because of it. Third, the gossip columns. Hedda Hopper and her colleagues circulated rumors of a romance between Wyman and Lou Ayres, her co-star in Johnny Belinda. Both of them denied it. Biographers who examined the question concluded that Ayres functioned as an intellectual companion during her separation, rather than the cause of it, and the rumor has never climbed above the level of tabloid speculation. File it under unverified, where it has sat for 7 decades. It reveals something about the era that a rumored affair seemed like a more printable explanation than the documented one, namely that a movie star preferred union meetings to his own living room. Fourth, the internet era favorite, and it is flatly wrong. According to this version, Wyman, a lifelong Republican, left Reagan because she couldn't stand his conservatism. One problem: in 1947 and 1948, Ronald Reagan remained a committed New Deal Democrat, and the conservative Reagan of legend did not yet exist, nor would he for years. Whatever drove Jane Wyman out of that marriage, it could not have been an ideology her husband still lacked. If anything, she divorced the liberal. Strip away the rumor and the anachronism, and the remaining picture looks almost mundane, which somehow lands harder. A grieving mother, an absent husband, one career passing another on the staircase, and endless political arguments echoing through a house built for magazine photographers. Nothing exotic, just a marriage worn down in full view of the cameras. The aftermath is where this story turns genuinely strange, because both parties spent the rest of their lives handling the marriage in exactly the same way, with a pair of matching, near-total silences. Start with Reagan's. The pattern started early. In his 1965 autobiography, Where's the Rest of Me?, written as he pivoted from acting toward politics, Reagan recounted the Hollywood years with Wyman only briefly, avoided any real analysis of the divorce, and framed the whole thing as an unexpected sorrow that struck while guild business preoccupied him. A quarter century later, in An American Life, those 9 years shrank further, down to the single paragraph this video opened with. It didn't work out, it produced 2 wonderful children, and life really began in 1952. In private, the tone ran differently. Reagan rarely raised Wyman's name on his own, but when friends or biographers asked, what came back sounded like regret rather than resentment. He reportedly told visitors, "Perhaps I should have quit trying to save the world and instead tried to save my marriage." For a man famously allergic to self-examination, that sentence carries unusual weight because it concedes the courtroom's verdict. Wyman swore she couldn't take the endless political arguments, and Reagan, decades later, quietly agreed with her. During his presidency, from 1981 to 1989, official White House biographical sketches and campaign materials acknowledged the first marriage and his children with Wyman, factually, then stopped, keeping the narrative spotlight fixed on his partnership with First Lady Nancy Reagan. The sketches denied nothing and elaborated nothing. Biographers described the pattern as narrative compression and personal reticence, a polite way of admitting that a man who built an entire public persona out of warm storytelling fell nearly wordless on the subject of his own first marriage. That gap arose from no accident. It matches the shape of the wound. Now consider Wyman's side, which ran, if anything, stricter. From the moment Reagan announced his candidacy for governor of California in 1966, she instituted a policy and enforced it for nearly 4 decades. She would never discuss Ronald Reagan publicly. Interviewers received warnings in advance that a single question about him would terminate the conversation immediately, and her standing line never changed: "I do not comment on Ronald Reagan." When she explained herself, the explanation disarmed everyone who expected bitterness. "It's not because I'm bitter or because I don't agree with him politically. I've always been a registered Republican," she explained, adding that it's bad taste to talk about ex-husbands and ex-wives, that's all, before finishing with a flourish, "I don't know a damn thing about politics." Picture that for a moment, a registered Republican refusing, on grounds of etiquette, to discuss the Republican president she once married. Reporters ran into that wall for 4 decades and never broke through it. The policy survived every tempting occasion too. Reagan's rise handed entertainment journalists a fresh reason to call her every few years, and every call ended in exactly the same place. She broke the moratorium only in the narrowest, most formal ways. Private telegrams of congratulation reached Reagan when he won the governorship in 1966 and the presidency in 1980. Then on June 5th, 2004, when Reagan died, came one public statement: "America has lost a great president and a great, kind, and gentle man." She attended his memorial mass at the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels in Los Angeles, stood at the interment at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, and after that returned to saying nothing at all. Which brings us back to the charge in this video's title. Did Ronald Reagan actually want to erase this marriage from history? The prosecution holds real evidence. Compressing 9 years and 3 children into one paragraph of a 726-page memoir amounts to narrative surgery of a very deliberate kind, and the refrain, "My life really began when I met Nancy," rhetorically deletes the Wyman years from his own timeline. The political incentive existed too. Reagan became the first divorced man ever to win the American presidency, and would remain the only one until Donald Trump and his 1976 and 1980 campaigns drew pointed scrutiny from social conservatives and the emerging moral majority. His strategists answered by putting the unbroken, idyllic union with Nancy at center stage, a reassurance aimed squarely at traditional voters. While inside the White House, aides discouraged press exploration of the 1940s Hollywood marriage and propped up an official story in which Reagan's domestic life effectively started in 1952. But the defense holds evidence too, and it complicates the verdict badly. Reagan never denied the marriage, and he never hid its children. Maureen and Michael Reagan campaigned for their father as prominent, visible surrogates and appeared frequently at the White House, which is a strange way to treat evidence you are supposedly trying to destroy. The divorce itself received matter-of-fact coverage from major media in 1980, so any voter who cared to know knew. And Reagan's most serious biographers, Lou Cannon and Edmund Morris, argue that his silence grew out of personal heartbreak and an old-fashioned, mid-century Midwestern refusal to speak ill of an ex-wife, not out of a political operation. Then comes the fact that unravels the erasure theory almost by itself. The silence came from both sides. A cover-up run by one side looks like suppression, but this looked like a treaty. Wyman's iron ban on discussing Reagan removed the marriage from public conversation at least as effectively as anything his aides ever managed, and she maintained that ban through his governorship, his presidency, his retirement, and his death. Her desire for privacy and his political survival wanted precisely the same outcome, and for nearly 4 decades both of them delivered it, without, as far as the record shows, ever once needing to coordinate. Call it a covenant of silence, sustained against every incentive to break it. Publishers would have paid handsomely for her version of those 9 years, and political opponents in 1976 and 1980 would have amplified any grievance she cared to voice, yet she voiced none of it, leaving behind only congratulatory telegrams and an unbroken wall. That quiet arrangement changed American political culture more than either of them advertised. A divorced candidate counted as unelectable in the conventional wisdom, especially with religious conservatives ascendant, yet Reagan diffused the issue, not by hiding the divorce, but by starving it. No recriminations, no interviews, no dueling accounts, nothing for a scandal to feed on. The first divorce presidency became possible precisely because both people who lived through the divorce declined to narrate it, which leaves the final irony. The fullest account Jane Wyman ever gave of her marriage to Ronald Reagan remains the sentence she spoke under oath in 1948, about a fairly sensitive person and endless political arguments. 56 years later, her last public words about him ran 13 words long, called him great, kind, and gentle, and never mentioned the marriage at all. History did not erase the Reagan-Wyman marriage. The two people who lived it simply agreed, separately, politely, and permanently, to stop telling the story. And it turns out that is all an erasure has ever required.